Hello, this is chapter 21. I want to talk a little bit about break-even. I know that the book has its formula that it uses to calculate break-even. The one that I'm thinking of is break-even in units. And over here on the other side, break-even in dollars. It writes it out like this, fixed cost. He writes it out as fixed cost divided by contribution margin per unit. So contribution margin per unit. And this is break even in units. And then they have break even in dollars. And they say that this is fixed cost divided by the contribution margin ratio. Now that's a lot to have to try to keep tucked away. I'm going to show you a better way to look at it. This is the logic of why it came to be the way it came. So let's start with the contribution margin income statement, which is sales minus variable cost equals contribution margin minus fixed cost equals net operating income. And let's pull out some fictitious numbers. Let's say that we're selling a product and the sale price per unit is $50 per unit. The variable cost is $30 per unit. And then that makes the contribution margin $20 per unit. Okay, when we did the contribution margin ratio, we took the contribution margin divided by the sales. Now, if you remember in Accounting 112, when we did vertical analysis, we took the income statement and everything was divided by sales. And you went down the line on the income statement and divided every number by sales to come up with a percentage of sales. So sales is going to wind up being at 100% because sales divided by sales. Variable cost divided by sales, well, 30 divided by 50 is going to make that 60%, okay? And then consequently, the contribution margin, 20 divided by 50, is going to be 40%. So my contribution margin is 40%, and that's the contribution margin ratio, because I've always said everything divided by sales, everything is divided by sales, okay? You only had to go this far, down to contribution margin. That's the key dollar amount. Now, what's this deal here with the fixed cost? Tell you what, if you wanted to have break even, then that means net income has to be zero. So let's just say we have fixed cost of $10,000. If $10,000 is my fixed cost, what does contribution margin have to be for the net income to be zero? Well, the answer to that is 10,000. See, when they came up with this formula, they had to come up with a fixed dollar amount, and so they used fixed cost. Well, if fixed cost again is 10,000 and net income is zero, then that means contribution margin is really 10,000. The key amount, the key here is to take contribution margin, not fixed cost. We're looking at contribution margin because this is the part that really is part of figuring out break even, this whole area. So if I take contribution margin at 10,000 and want to figure out the break even in units, well, what is 10,000 divided by 20? And why I came up with this is you have to figure out how many units at $20 per unit contribution margin do I have to make to come up with 10,000. And so that makes the calculation so much easier. Just take the 10,000 divided by 20. Whoops. And that's going to be 500. So it's going to be 500 units that you had to make in order to have break even of 0 net income. Okay, $10,000 divided by $20 per unit gives us 500 units. If you go the other way, 500 units times $20 per unit gives a contribution margin of $10,000. You could then also figure out sales and variable costs by taking the 500 times 30, so that's going to be 15,000, right? And then 500 times 50 is what? That's right, 25,000. Okay, so that's break even in units. Break even in dollars, well, they use the contribution margin ratio. Here's why. Again, the contribution margin is a key number, and they're going to divide by 40% to arrive at the 25,000. Well, look at it this way. If I did 25,000 in sales and I multiplied that by 40%, 25,000 times 0.4 is equal to 10,000. So that makes it 10,000. So wouldn't it make sense that if you multiply this by this to get that number, if you took this and divided by this, you'd get that number? It's simple math, really, is what it is. That's what this is all about, okay? And this is also just simple logic, taking the contribution margin divided by the dollar amount per unit to get the total number of units that you'd have to make to get this number to come out. And then to come up with the break even in dollars, you take the contribution divided by the contribution margin ratio to come up with the dollar amount. Okay, and the same is true if you're looking for a target profit. And what they do is they take fixed cost plus profit, whatever the target profit is, and the same thing here, fixed cost plus the target profit. And it's the same logic, because if we wanted to have a profit of say $5,000 and we have fixed cost of $10,000, then guess what? What does contribution margin have to be to have a net income of $5,000? Well, contribution margin is going to be $5,000 plus $10,000 is $15,000 contribution margin. And so we're back in the same square again. 15,000 divided by 20 is going to give you the number of units, okay? Because you need to know how many units at $20 per unit do I need to do to get 15,000, and you'll calculate the number of units. It may not come out completely even, it won't because it's an odd number, but you can still figure out approximately the number of units. And then the same thing, 15,000 divided by 40% is going to give you the sale amount. And so this is the logic. They just had to formulate it in some way to put it into a textbook. But the people who figured this out, they use logic and they use simple mathematics to calculate these numbers.